everyone. Welcome to Miss Von Maxey Reads, and today I'm going to share with you one of my favorite books. It is a great story because it is based off of a little bit of a real story. So it's a little bit of realistic fiction and also some historical fiction. And it is called John Philip Duck, and it is written by a wonderful author named Patricia Polacco. She has written many books for upper elementary, but for my younger kiddos, I really think you're going to enjoy the story of John Philip Duck. Here is the inside cover. So we have been taking a look at the plot diagram, and so we're going to be taking a look at the exposition with the characters and setting, and then parts of the plot. So this was written in loving memory of Robert McCloskey, an inspiration to the author since he was a child. All right, so we got to scooch over a little bit. So Edward was a sweet boy who lived with his family on a small farm just outside Memphis in the foothills of Tennessee. Times were hard. There was a depression on and money was hard to come by. Even though Edward was just a lad, he and his father worked at the same hotel in Memphis. During the work week, they stayed at the hotel, but on weekends, they both went home. So we've already established our characters. Now we've got a little bit of a problem that he has to work. Edward loved the weekends. He and his family all gathered around the old radio in the parlor and listened to grand music. Edward especially loved hearing the brass bands play marches by John Philip Sousa. It made Edward dream about wearing a snappy uniform and with shiny brass buttons. Someday, I'm going to have a uniform just like that. You'll see, he'd say as he marched around the parlor to lively music. Seems like his family is getting quite the kick out of his little antics. Take a look at that record player. That is how we used to listen to music a long time ago. Edward was a dreamer, all right. One time, right in the middle of chores there on the farm, he stopped and looked up in wonder. Wild ducks were calling and were flying in perfect formation. Ain't they grand, Pa? Look how they fly in perfect V's. And look, they're following a leader. See, the one right in the point of the V? He secretly wished he could be with them, just to touch them feathers and look at them real close like. I'm going to get real close because you can't quite see. There are the flying V's. This one's an especially long train of birds. One weekend, while Edward was doing his chores, he heard a tiny little sound coming from some bulrushes on the edge of the pond. When he looked, there it was, the tiniest, scrawniest little duckling he'd ever seen, a wild one left shivering from the cold. Edward scooped it up in his hands. He couldn't see its mother anywhere. He slipped it into his shirt so it could be next to his warm skin. It looks kind of like really excited. So I want you to make a prediction really quickly. What is Edward going to do with this duck? That night at dinner, Edward got the duckling to eat right out of his hand. Usually when they are little, they don't survive, Edward's ma said. If I can make this little critter well, can I keep him, Ma? Edward pleaded. This little creature will take constant care. And what will he do while you are gone all week at the hotel, Pa said. Edward thought for a moment. Can't we take him with us, Pa? To the hotel? His father scowled. Pa, please, I'll keep him in a box in the pantry, right next to the cooking stove so he'll be warm. Big Joe will let me, I know he will, Edward begged. Big Joe is only the cook. I'm worried about Mr. Shutt, Pa said. Mr. Shutt was the hotel manager. But then his Pa and Ma looked around at each other. They could see how much Edward wanted this duck. Well, I guess we can give it a try, but you have to keep him hidden or we could both lose our jobs, Pa warned. All right, so we are still getting to our rising action. Now, Frank Shutt was a huge man. He was the general manager of the hotel. He ran a tight ship, and his word was law. His booming voice echoed down the hallways as he inspected his staff, but he was always fair. Edward sneaked his little duckling into the pantry next to the stove where he and Big Joe the cook could look after him. Of course, after a time, all the hotel staff came into the kitchen just to see how the little fellow was doing. Everyone swore to keep the little duck a secret from Mr. Shutt. Although Edward took him home on the weekends, the duckling soon became a fixture in the kitchen. Pretty soon, he could hop out of his box. Then he ventured into the halls. It gives you an up-close look of Mr. Shutt. If you look, Edward's got the little duckling right there in his shoebox. Right by. But one day, the little duck waddled right into the lobby. Mr. Shutt almost saw him, but Edward grabbed the little fellow and stuck him into his shirt. You there, my boy, Mr. Shutt bellowed. Mr. Templeton in 203 wants his shoes shined. Now, you run up and put a shine on them like a mirror. About then, the little duckling gave a very loud quack. Mr. Shutt narrowed his eyes, came right up to Edward. What was that? He barked. One of the bellmen coughed loudly. That was me, sir. My pardon, sir. Mr. Shutt glowered out at him for a moment. Well, take care, Bingham. Take care, he called out as he harumphed away. After that close call, everyone who worked at the hotel took turns keeping the little duckling out of Mr. Shutt's way. It was their secret. Close up, they were that close to the ladies. And if you look really close, there he is right in his shirt pocket. It's quite the close call. Whenever Edward was busy, they all helped hide the duck. Chef Villiard hid him under the entree lid. The manicurist carried him on her cart. So she's going to do ladies' nails. The valet kept him under his hat. And the front desk crew kept him in a vacant key box. The doorman kept him in his pocket. Everyone fell in love with that little duck. So you can see he's in that empty keyhole. One night after Mr. Shutt had left for the day, Edward put on a John Phillips Sousa march on the phonograph. Watch, Edward said to the staff. All you have to do is tap this stick on the floor and he'll do what I taught him to do. Edward tapped twice and the little duck turned round and round. 3 taps and the little duck marched up and down the lobby hall. 4 taps and the little duck stood as still as a statue. Edward tapped out a pattern and the little ducks hopped right into the lobby fountain. He did 1 or 2 tricks right there as Edward tapped his stick. Then he tapped again and the little duck hopped off of the fountain and down the hall. Amazing, everyone exclaimed. He marches as proper as John Philip Sousa himself, someone said. Now, John Philip Sousa was a composer, and he did a lot of the big brass marching band music. So that's where the name comes from. Edward stopped. That's it. That'll be his name. John Philip Duck. Everyone laughed. So we're still in that rising action. We haven't got to the climax yet. One day, not long after, some of Mr. Shutt's hunting buddies were staying at the hotel. They were in town to duck hunt at the crack of dawn the next morning. As a joke, they put their live duck decoys in the lobby fountain pool. Edward watched them swimming there, and his heart ached at the thought of what they could be used for. Come on, boys, Mr. Shutt's voice boomed. Let's get to the kitchen and pack some provisions for your hunt tomorrow. Edward's heart stopped. John Philip Duck was in the kitchen. Big Joe must have heard Mr. Shutt because Edward saw him slip John Philip Duck into the fountain with the other ducks. I'll never find him there, Big Joe whispered as he passed Edward. All that evening, every time Edward tried to get John Philip out of the fountain, Mr. Shutt seemed to be there with his hunting buddies. Then, to Edward's horror, the men started pulling the ducks from the fountain, putting them in the cages to take for the early morning hunt. Edward felt his heart skip a beat as he watched the hunters stuff John Philip into a cage. Okay, so on our plot diagram, very top, climax, this exciting part. Edward had to do something. Wait, please, he finally called out. One of them ducks is my pet. So here's Edward leading to Mr. Shutt all of the hunting ducks that are in the fountain. I'm going to let you take a moment just to absorb in what is the illustrator trying to show you here. Painting a picture for you. Look at the emotion that's happening on that page. Mr. Shutt and his friends stopped in turn. Mr. Shutt glowered at Edward. Well, boy, what is he doing in my hotel and in my fountain? He bellowed. Edward almost started to cry. He told the red-faced manager the whole story of how John Philip came to be at the hotel. Mr. Shutt's eyes softened. Please, sir, let me show you the tricks that John Philip can do. Edward pleaded as he took his duck out of the cage. All right, boy, let's see, Mr. Shutt barked, as he and his friends took seats nearby to watch. Edward turned on the music. It was a Sousa march, and John Philip was in the best form he had ever been. He did all of his tricks without a hitch. He marched to and from the fountain. He hopped in and out of the fountain pool on command, just as Edward had taught him. When John Philip was done, he waddled up to Mr. Shutt and cocked his head. Well, I never did see, Mr. Shutt said, almost in a whisper. One of the hotel guests had seen it and commented to Mr. Shutt, what an unusual touch. A well-dressed lady cooed, I've never seen in all my world of travel a hotel with live ducks swimming in the lobby fountain. Wonderful, simply wonderful. All of the guests enjoyed John Philip, sir, one of the bellmen exclaimed. Oh, sir, Edward said, wouldn't it be something if we could have ducks swimming in the fountain all of the time? Everyone cheered in approval. Mr. Shutt, I could teach all of them very ducks to do tricks and march in and out of the fountain. He pointed to the hunter's ducks. People from everywhere would come and see them. I know they would, Edward blurted out. Mr. Shutt thought for a very long time. He conferred with his hunting buddies, which means he's talking to them on the side. Tell you what, boy, we're going to give you all these ducks here to train up. I'm giving you a month to train them all to march into the lobby, get into the fountain, and stay there all day, then march out again. And can John Philip stay here too, except for when I take him home, that is? Edward asked hopefully. Well, I guess he can, Mr. Shutt said as he marched away. But you have 1 month, he bellowed as he disappeared into the corner. I've got a little bit of hope. Mr. Shutt let Edward build a duck house on the roof of the hotel. Every day, Edward trained the ducks to march to the tapping of his stick. He got them to march from the roof, down the hall, even into the elevator. Down 12 floors it went. When the doors opened, the ducks marched up into the lobby. At first, they all scattered, but John Philip helped Edward round them up. Finally, Edward got them all to march to the fountain, go up 3 steps that he had made, and plop into the water. But they hopped out and waddled around the lobby again. Oh, so there's a little bit of chaos, especially on the tables. Edward worked and worked with them for days. At last, he got them trained to stay in the fountain all day. In good time, too, because his month was up the very next day. It was Friday afternoon at 3. Mr. Schutz and many hotel guests were already seated in the lobby waiting. Edward was very nervous. He took the elevator up to the roof to get the ducks. John Philip led them all down as usual. They marched into the elevator as usual. Those 12 floors seemed to take forever. When the doors opened to the lobby, Edward could see Mr. Schutz. He looked stern. Edward then noticed that the bellman had rolled out the red carpet to the fountain. They had placed velvet ropes on either side of the carpet. All of the staff winked at him. Then Edward heard a brass band playing John Philip Sousa March. His own pa had put on the record. He looked so proud, but a little worried too. Edward tapped his stick and all the ducks marched perfectly down the red carpet. People oohed and awed as they passed by. With a few taps of his stick, the ducks hopped into the fountain, one by one. The carpet was rolled up, the velvet ropes and stairs removed. The ducks swam as people crowded around just to see them. Well, this by Dippy is the best show I ever did see, Mr. Shutt chuckled. Edward beamed. But this test ain't over yet, Mr. Shutt added. These ducks have to stay in this fountain all day. Edward knew that would be the biggest test. All that day he stayed out of sight and watched to see if any of his trainees tried to get out of the fountain. None of them did. They swam there all day long. So that's the ducks getting into the fountain, led by John Philip himself. Then at 5 o'clock, the red carpet was rolled out again, the velvet ropes and steps put in place. The elevator opened. Edward tapped his stick and the ducks jumped out of the fountain one by one. They marched up the red carpet again to a John Philip Sousa march, then waddled into the elevator, rode up to the roof, and marched into their duck house. We did it, Edward whispered with all of the ducks as he fed them their favorite mash. John Philip quacked loudly as if he were proud too. None of this would have happened if I hadn't found you, Edward said softly as he petted John Philip's head. So that's him sitting with all of his duckies. Edward took the elevator downstairs again, and when the doors opened, Mr. Shutt was waiting for him. All the staff was gathered there in the lobby with Edward. Edward's pa, too. Mr. Shutt cleared his throat. We found this here uniform especially for you, my boy. You did what we reckoned it would be near impossible, but you did it, and I stand corrected. Well done, son. Well done. Then Mr. Shutt handed Edward a splendid uniform with 2 rows of brass buttons and a grand cap. I hereby declare you Edward Pembroke, official duckmaster of the Peabody Hotel. Everyone cheered. Edward's dream had come true. He'd wear that wonderful uniform with the brass buttons and march to a John Philip Sousa and be near his beloved ducks. We are finally at the big part of the story. Here comes our falling action. Over the years, Edward Pembroke trained many a duck to march to the fountain in the lobby of the Peabody Hotel in Memphis. He personally trained everyone. They served as Pembroke ducks for 3 months or so before they were returned to the wild, except John Philip, who stayed for all of his duck life with Edward. Edward Pembroke served as duckmaster of the Peabody Hotel for over 50 years. The hotel even named a room after him. When he retired, he moved to his dear little farm just outside of Memphis. There, he had his very own pond with John Philip's descendants. That means all of his children and grandchildren. But he searched the skies every day, hoping that the wild ducks might land and stay with him too. Let's see, he's got the flying bees again. Oops. The ducks are flying. He's waiting. But they always flew overhead and disappeared into the horizon until one day It was said that on that day, Edward was sitting by the pond and John Philip Sousa March came on his radio. He turned it up loud as it would go, then stood and doffed his hat. At that very moment, flocks of wild ducks flying overhead rolled over out of formation and circled and landed. They marched right up to him and cocked their heads. They came and came by the hundreds, his graduates all. And for the rest of his days, they say, whenever those ducks passed by, they never failed to stop over and march again with their beloved duck masters. The end. So this is a fictional story. So this did not exactly happen. Here is Patricia's footnote. This entirely fictional story of a young man who dared to bring his pet duck into the marbled halls of the famous Peabody Hotel was inspired by the legend of the Peabody Ducks and by the personnel of the Peabody, who found a truly original role for the first duck and all of its mates ever since, a role that has lasted for over 60 years. So there was an original duck. There are still ducks at the Peabody Hotel, and there was originally a duck master. So if you, and I've gone to see this before, if you go to Memphis and you go to the Peabody Hotel, their logo is actually a duck. And at just the right time in the morning, they will roll out the carpet and put the velvet ropes up, play a John Philip March, and all of the ducks will do just like it said in the book. They walk down the red carpet and flop into the fountains, and they roll the carpet away. So that part is truly based on a true story. So that is the story of John Philip Duck. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I loved reading it to you. Have a great day.